Welcome back to Cinelog, the series where I review every important or interesting movie in chronological order. Today, we finish off the 1940s. The decade on the whole has mostly dealt with the Second World War and the recovery after it. 1949 is the first year where it feels like that recovery is in full swing. Incredible films from Japan, the US, and Europe, which seemed to pick up right where the 30s left off. To illustrate what I'm talking about, let's just dive right in. We begin the year with Carol Reed's noir classic, The Third Man. This is about an American who arrives in Vienna to make a rendezvous with an old friend, only to find that his friend has mysteriously died. This, I would argue, is the earliest movie I've seen to really tackle the Cold War. I do take issue with how much of the story is wasted on trying to figure out how Harry Lime was murdered, when in the end it doesn't really matter. That being said, if you stick with it, this has one of the best third acts of any movie ever, period. This is a very easy movie to spoil if you haven't seen it, so I won't say too much, but the entirety of the last half hour is really engrossing. Also love this quiet romance that goes on underneath the main mystery. And man, that final shot is absolutely devastating. Oh, and how could I forget about the score? The theme is comedic when it first appears, but feels melancholic by the end. It's indicative of the overarching narrative, which starts and ends in the same place, only the emotions have changed. American optimism is swiftly defeated by European cynicism. We all lose in the end. Next, I watched the gangster classic White Heat. This is just a badass movie. Like, what else do I have to say? Cagney's great, love his iconic closing line, just a really fun, intense gangster drama with a fiery third act. Brilliant dialogue too, with an outstanding supporting cast. Next on the menu we have Bitter Rice. This is an Italian post-war classic about a group of female rice farmers and their struggle with work, romance, and their oppressive higher-ups. For the first two acts, this is a damn good melodrama. The two main girls are excellent, and there's a strong dichotomy that's spelled out between them which drives the central conflict. While I find the male characters pretty dull, I do enjoy the way that they bring new challenges to our protagonists and complicate the drama. Then there's that third act, which, basically, it turns into Italian neo-realist Die Hard. Like, okay, spoilers, but the climax of this movie is like a shootout scene. It's like neo-realist Django Unchained. On one hand, that sounds fucking awesome, but by the same turn, what started as this respectable comedic melodrama succumbs to pulpy, borderline B-movie theatrics with this horribly contrived, emotionally manipulative ending. It doesn't ruin the movie, I guess. It's not the worst ending in the world, but damn, it feels so out of whack with how smart it was up until that point. It seems like the ending was meant to juxtapose neo-realism with Hollywood, more conventional style of filmmaking, but this director only has a good grasp on one of those genres, so it doesn't really work. I'd still recommend this though. I think the first and second acts are strong enough, and the critique of capitalism is pretty effective. And hey, maybe you'll find something in the ending that I didn't. Next, I watched Stray Dog. This is an early Kurosawa flick about a cop who investigates Tokyo's underworld after his gun is stolen on a bus. Holy smokes, this is a good-ass movie. Right off the bat, we have our inciting incident, and we're introduced to our lovable but deeply flawed rookie protagonist. After a gradual first 40 minutes to establish things and get the plot rolling, Takashi Shimura's character enters and this movie becomes amazing. Kurosawa spends much of the film exploring the philosophical differences between Shimura and Mifune's characters and how they approach their police work. The two make for excellent leads, and their relationship makes for this movie's unsuspectingly powerful emotional core. Love the way the third act reveals itself as a commentary on post-war Japan, a nation in ruin, whose people are desperate in the wake of economic and cultural collapse. And it does so in bristlingly intense fashion. Then I saw Criss Cross. After watching and absolutely loving The Killers, I figured I'd check out another Siodmak joint. And while this is nowhere near the level of The Killers, I wasn't too disappointed in this. The direction's great, I love the deep focus cinematography, and in many ways this feels like The Killer's darker, naughtier cousin. The structure holds it back a bit for me, not in love with how the flashback is utilized here. In many ways, it undercuts the intensity of the opening, and it never fully recovers. I thought this was solid overall, though. I really like the way it wraps up. Next, I watched Kind Hearts and Coronets, one of the greatest, well, often considered one of the greatest English films of all time. It follows an outcast aristocrat who kills every member of his extended family to secure his accession to their exorbitant fortune. When this movie is like having scenes, it's awesome. It's great. The performances rock. The British humor is tons of fun to watch. The ironies of the closing sequence feel so good when they hit. It's the montage-like framing of the story that I have a hard time getting behind. We breeze through vast, essential aspects of the character's development without ever really being offered a strong connection or a defining decision that would develop him. Not to mention that these montages go on forever and they have no conflict. I take one good scene developing this character over any number of montages to convey his backstory. I'll admit it's somewhat excusable in service of it playing out like a memoir, which is essential to the story's themes and ending, though some stronger character scenes in the first act would have helped out tremendously for me. Next up is the 1949 Oscar winner All the King's Men, a political drama about an upstart politician gaining power and then slowly succumbing to the very corruption he claimed to stand against. It plays out exactly how you would expect. There really aren't any surprises in the script, its themes are pretty basic. It's alright. Then I checked out some of the year's biggest war movies, William A. Wellman's Battleground and Henry King's 12 O'Clock High. Battleground I thought was very good. It's a lot like A Walk in the Sun, but better written and a bit more realistic. It doesn't do too much with the characters, which can make it or break it for people, but I really appreciated the realism in this one, and the production is infallible. 12 O'Clock High is a different story. This one takes place in the offices of an Air Force HQ following a harsh new commander who takes over and tries to improve their standards. Like Battleground, the characters are flat as shit, only this time there's no spectacle to distract us from it. We just have to watch them endlessly deliberate in the same office for like the entire runtime. I could have gotten the exact same experience reading the plot summary on Wikipedia. After that, I watched William Wyler's The Heiress. This movie is gorgeous. The direction and the performances are detailed and brilliant. Olivia de Havilland is probably the most deserving Oscar winner ever. Her character arc is harrowing and totally earned. The conflict between her and her domineering father makes for a fascinating moral dilemma which carries the majority of the film. My only major reservation is with Montgomery Clift's character. He seems to really only serve the drama, and he never really comes into his own as a character. I think his performance is great, but at the end of the day, I needed something more from him. He just felt a bit shallow. Loved everything else, though. This is probably my favorite Wyler film so far. Next, I saw Late Spring, Ozu. Now, I have a lot to say about this one. Like a lot of Ozu's work, this is a challenging piece that I would not recommend to anyone outside of the film world. It's very much a museum piece, makes very few compromises with satisfying the audience, instead focusing explicitly on the director's expression and how to advance cinema form. On that front, however, it is very impressive. There are very few movies that are so willing to meander the way that Ozu's work so often does. But it never feels aimless. His intentionally sloppy progression is meant to emulate the pace of real life. Oftentimes he'll frame the characters in the background with their environment as the focus of any given shot. On a level of technique, it's certainly revolutionary. And while the film is often very slow and very hard to crack into for its first half, as the characters' emotional conflicts start to unravel and the plot goes on, it slowly starts to take shape, and when the emotional blows land, they are absolutely devastating. That final scene is going to be etched into my mind for a very long time. Looking for something a little more light, I checked out Robert Wise's The Setup. Short, sweet, simple, to the point. Great sports movie, great thriller, great noir. The boxing match is riveting, incredibly well shot, choreographed, and performed. Wise's direction across the entire film is really, really sharp, and it contains one of the sweetest endings of the year. If you've ever got 70 minutes to kill, I highly recommend giving this a shot. Lovely film. Finishing off the year, finishing off the decade, we have Silence de la Mer, The Silence of the Sea. This is the debut film by the seminal French auteur Jean-Pierre Melville. While its talky, anti-cinematic nature might be a turnoff for some people, I found this to be one of the most compelling and thought-provoking World War II movies that I have ever seen. Essentially, a French family, an old man and his niece, have to house an occupying German for several months after France's defeat. This is the only film that I have seen from the 1940s to offer some empathy to a Nazi. However, the film is still careful to remain critical of their wretched ideology. Instead, it idealizes and romanticizes France through the lens of an invading German. The silence of its main characters is a representation of the silence of France itself, their inability to combat fascism or cultural decay prior to Germany's invasion. While the dialogue is ripe for thematic analysis, there is still plenty of intense and intimate filmmaking that Melville employs to make it a gripping experience. Whenever the Nazi talks about marrying the countries of France and Germany, he's careful to include the niece in the frame, making it uncomfortably personal. Tense editing and standoffish performances only heighten the air of suspense that Melville conjures up. Really fantastic film, and I find it incredibly fitting that I end the 1940s on one of cinema's greatest goodbyes. So, that was the 1940s. Quite the interesting decade. Obviously, the war had a big impact on it. I have to go back and do a video in the first half of the decade, but that probably won't be for a while. While I think film noir is a very cool genre that led to a wealth of great movies, its takeover kind of spelled the end of the rom-com. Where the 1930s were brimming with these lush, lovely, remarkably well-written romantic comedies, they seem to have fizzled out a bit in the 1940s for this darker, more intense variety of macho cinema. This could also be a result of the world getting more nationalistic and less progressive, or it could just also be that I'm only watching certain movies and there are a plethora of great 30s style comedies I'm just missing. I've also noticed that morality has gotten much more black and white, especially in Hollywood in the wake of World War II. In Europe, however, I can start to see the groundwork slowly being laid for the artistic explosion film would experience in the 60s and 70s, but of course it's been majorly set back by the World War. Something else is I didn't give a single A+ grade this entire decade. That's not to say there weren't any great films, but there wasn't anything I would consider an absolute masterpiece. If there's anything I missed from the past 5 years that might crack it, please let me know in the comments. I'll be continuing to watch more movies from this decade as I move forward and catch up on some of the stuff that I missed. When I find that perfect 40s movie, I'll be sure to do a video on it.
You got a good memory for names. Too good.